Welcome to the Deep Dive.
It's great to be here.
Today, we're tackling a really complex topic, something deeply personal for many.
We're looking into the experience of transgender individuals who choose to remain in the closet.
Exactly. Why they might make that choice,
hmm
what that feels like psychologically. We've gathered some, well, quite diverse perspectives,
Yeah, we have. We've got firsthand accounts from online communities, specifically Reddit, like Rask Transgender and RFTM.
which gives us that really direct personal insight.
Wow. And then we're layering on some expert analysis. There's an article from Psychiatric Times. It's called The Closet: Psychological Issues of Being in and Coming Out.
Okay, so a clinical perspective, too.
Exactly. And one more piece from a blog called The Transverse titled The Trans Experience Back in the Closet. It explores a slightly different angle.
Right, kind of an unexpected twist on being closeted.
You could say that.
So, for you listening, our goal today, our mission for this deep dive, is to really understand the nuances here. We want to go beyond simple answers.
Yeah, look at the different reasons for staying closeted, the emotional weight, the different viewpoints within the trans community itself.
Get a more complete picture, basically. Okay, let's dive in. Where should we start?
Well, there's a post on Rax Transgender from someone called Sunyak D30. They're 23.
Okay.
And they shared this really deep struggle. They talked about always wishing they'd been born female, but feeling like transitioning was just not possible for them right now, at least.
Not possible. That's a strong statement. What were the barriers they mentioned?
Well, the big ones were worries about their parents finding out.
Ah, family pressure.
Yeah, big time. Also, concerns about their career, financial stability, and just feeling like they didn't have the strength to face potential societal challenges.
That really paints a picture of that internal conflict, doesn't it?
Right.
That deep desire versus these very real practical fears.
Absolutely. And they mentioned something else interesting, this wish for like an instant painless transition.
Like magic. Just skip the hard parts?
Yeah, exactly. Which I think speaks volumes about how difficult the actual process can feel or seem from the outside.
Definitely. So did others chime in?
Oh, yeah. A friend, username ConfuseDanLost, added some context about their social environment.
Okay.
They mentioned their country, saying while younger people might be getting more accepting, overall society isn't really there yet. So that external pressure is a huge factor.
Right, the broader culture playing a role. But the friend was supportive.
Very. They explicitly said they'd stand by Sonyak Thady no matter what, which is huge, right? Even one person.
Yeah, that makes a massive difference. Then we get a different take.
From Amy Silverstone, 69, their perspective is much more about prioritizing yourself.
How so?
They basically argued that your own life, your own comfort has to come first, even if parents disapprove. They shared their own story.
Oh.
Yeah, regretting living, as they put it, as someone else for 25 years because of parental expectations, mentioning gender policing from parents and how damaging that was.
Wow. So a perspective born from negative experience.
Definitely. And they made this point quite bluntly that if parents disapprove, that's their choice. And that trying to be altruistic by sacrificing your own well-being just leads to self-disappointment in the end.
That's a challenging idea. Puts the responsibility squarely back on the individual, doesn't it?
It does. And then you get the adult chiming in with a really strong reaction against that feeling of transition is not possible.
Okay. Pushing back on the original post.
Big time.
Yeah.
They shared their own story transitioning despite having a, well, very unsupportive family, described as Republican, anti-LGBTQ+.
Wow, that sounds tough.
Yeah, they faced social media harassment, even got removed from family wills, but they still transitioned.
And their takeaway was?
Overwhelmingly positive about transitioning itself, but
Right.
huge regret about wasting decades.
Right. That sense of lost time.
Exactly. Their message was basically, seize any chance you get. It's never too late. They even mentioned women transitioning in their 80s.
Powerful contrast to that initial feeling of impossibility.
Absolutely. Then there's Too Late for Tough. They offer this really insightful breakdown.
Okay.
They distinguish between not knowing you're trans being an uncracked egg, as the community sometimes says, versus knowing but staying closeted.
Ah, that's a crucial difference. So the uncracked egg state, how do they describe that?
As like living an okay life, not terrible, but not great either, kind of disconnected, emotions suppressed.
Right.
They use this great analogy of volume knob.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, the idea is when you suppress the bad feelings, you also turn down the volume on the good ones. Life becomes muted.
Okay, so numb but functional, maybe?
Sort of, but then they contrast that with knowing you're trans but staying closeted. That, they say, is much harder.
Why is that?
Because the internal conflict is conscious, you feel like you're faking it, and accomplishments can feel hollow. That okay but not happy egg state becomes, in their words, potential torture when you know but have to wait.
That sounds incredibly difficult.
It does, and they had a direct message for the original poster, Sonyak D30. Basically, you're 23, don't wait, transition, and turn your volume up.
Wow. A really strong plea based on their own experience of that internal cost.
Exactly. It really emphasizes that while external factors matter, the internal price of suppression can be immense.
Then we shift gears a bit with EM Jamie again. A different life stage involved here.
Yeah, completely. They realized they were trans at 67.
67, okay.
Their therapist confirmed it, encouraged transition. Their wife is supportive too.
Sounds positive then.
Internally, yes. But externally, they still have to live in boy mode, as they put it, outside the home.
Why is that?
Because of their work environment. They live in a small, rural community, and the workplace is transphobic.
So even with self-acceptance and partner support, the environment is still a major barrier.
Exactly. It shows that being out isn't just an internal decision. Safety, livelihood, these are huge factors, even later in life.
That really complicates the narrative. Then there's a historical note.
Yeah, from Denim Skirt, they mentioned the historical heterosexual transvestite scene. As a way some people managed gender incongruence back when full transition was, well, less of an option or much less accepted.
Right. So finding ways to cope within the limitations of the time. It gives some historical depth.
It does. It shows people have always found ways, Then it's nice in here. Shared a very personal story of being closeted for years.
What did that involve for them?
Things like secret stashes of clothes, using online transgender fiction as an outlet.
Trying to find some way to express or connect with that part of themselves.
Exactly. But it led to isolation, emotional distress, eventually depression and therapy.
That sounds incredibly taxing.
Yeah. They made a really poignant point. You can repress your gender and still live life, but there's a significant emotional cost, often a lifelong one.
That phrase really sticks. Emotional cost.
And notably, they recommended therapy regardless of whether someone decides to transition or not, just to deal with the internal stuff.
Which seems like very sound advice, given the pressures involved. This feels like a good point to bring in the Psychiatric Times article.
Agreed. The article, The Closet, starts by defining closeted and coming out, mostly drawing from homosexual culture research, but the psychological dynamics are relevant.
Okay. What are the key ideas?
It highlights something unique about the developmental experience for many gay or trans individuals, often growing up without family mirroring or support for those feelings, and facing negative societal messages early on.
Unlike some other minority experiences where family might share the identity.
Exactly. Then it outlines different ways people relate to these feelings. There are closeted individuals who might not even consciously acknowledge their feelings, maybe using dissociation.
So not even aware on some level.
Potentially, or pushing it down very hard. Then there are those who are homosexually self-aware. They know how they feel, but don't act on it or tell people. Maybe for religious reasons, choosing celibacy, for instance.
Okay, an internal awareness, but external conformity.
Right. Then you have gay lesbian identified individuals who claim the identity, accept it to some degree, maybe coming out selectively. And finally, non-gay identified people who actively reject those feelings in themselves.
It sounds like quite a spectrum.
Definitely. And the article stresses these aren't rigid boxes. It's complex, influenced by culture, personal history. Being in the closet isn't one single thing.
And it mentioned dissociation.
Yes, specifically selective inattention. Basically, tuning out or not focusing on that part of yourself as a way to cope, to maintain the closet.
Like deliberately looking away from it.
Yeah. It can range from just not thinking about it to creating almost a whole double life.
And that impacts self-esteem.
Significantly. The article says it can make it hard to judge how others see you or even recognize your own strengths. You can feel kind of invisible, detached.
That makes sense. It also mentioned something about hostility.
Yes. Sometimes closeted individuals might engage in gay baiting or gay bashing. The article explains this as a defense mechanism.
How's that?
It's called identification with the aggressor. By attacking the very thing they fear in themselves, they try to distance themselves from it to prove they're not one of them.
Wow. That's quite a psychological twist.
It is. Then the article talks about coming out. It's not just telling people, is it?
No, it's framed as an internal process, too.
Yeah.
Integrating those parts of yourself you'd pushed away or dissociated.
Right. Unlearning all the negative messages, the stereotypes, learning about the actual community and culture. It's ongoing.
And that moment of coming out to oneself.
The article describes it as this subjective moment of inner recognition, often really emotional, feeling connected to your true self. That resonates with some of the Reddit stories, I think.
Definitely. But coming out to others, that brings fear.
Huge fear of rejection. The article even mentions people moving to a new city, just to come out among strangers first.
A fresh start, less baggage.
Yeah. So the therapist's role, according to the article, it's about respecting the individual's path, understanding these complexities.
And recognizing that while integrating these parts of the self is generally healthier.
The dangers of coming out in some situations are very real. It's not always safe or possible. Therapists need to balance that.
That's a really important nuance. Now, what about that blog post, the back in the closet idea?
Right, from the transverse. This is about Mark, a trans man. He transitioned, and in college, he started passing really well.
Passing meaning people perceived him as a cisgender man without knowing he was trans.
Exactly. He was living stealth, as it's often called.
Okay. So that sounds like a form of success in a way.
In one way, yes, he was accepted as male, but it created a different problem. He felt disconnected from the LGBT community.
How so?
He went to an LGBT campus event, and someone actually questioned why he was there, because he just looked like a straight cis guy to them.
Ouch. So he couldn't connect with his own community without outing himself.
Precisely. And the post mentions his living situation housemates who didn't know and seemed unlikely to be accepting, so outing himself felt risky.
It's really poignant that he apparently felt he had to identify as gay at that event just to feel like he belonged.
It really is. It highlights this unexpected form of isolation. You gain acceptance in one sphere, but potentially lose connection in another.
It's a totally different kind of closet than the one people talk about early in transition, right? When you might not be passing yet.
Completely different. The blog calls it a conundrum. Validation leads to a new kind of isolation.
Fascinating. Let's just briefly touch on a couple of other Reddit voices to round things out.
Okay. There was Selwyn Bannerb, who had a very stark view.
Which was?
That losing their parents over being trans was completely worth it. Prioritizing self above all else, essentially. Though they did add caveats about physical and financial safety.
Again, showing that spectrum of priorities.
Yeah.
For some, authenticity trumps even core relationships.
Exactly. And then Bess Isopod 9939 made that point about history again.
Right, that people have always found ways.
Yeah, expressing gender privately or subtly, even without a full public transition as we might think of it today, it speaks to resilience.
Definitely. And a contrasting story.
From Fearless Tip 9990, they said they'd been completely out of the closet since a kid.
So the opposite of being closeted.
Right. But it wasn't easy. They faced immense challenges: bullying, family rejection, school expulsion, even homelessness.
Wow. So being out doesn't guarantee an easy path either.
Not at all. It powerfully shows that visibility can come with its own significant dangers and hardships, even if it's crucial for their sense of self.
And finally, Rainbow's Crash.
Their story kind of brings us full circle. They stayed closeted until 25, mainly out of fear.
Similar to the first poster we discussed.
Yeah. They faced career issues, lost family who weren't supportive, but ultimately, after transitioning, they found much greater happiness.
So a story of overcoming those fears and finding fulfillment, despite the costs.
Exactly. It offers a hopeful perspective.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, a lot of different experiences and viewpoints.
We really have. I think the key takeaway is just how multifaceted this is. Remaining closeted isn't one thing.
No, it's driven by this whole cocktail of factors: fear of rejection, real safety concerns, career worries.
And sometimes even the unexpected consequences of transition itself, like Mark's story.
And the psychological side, the dissociation, the hit to self-esteem. It can be incredibly heavy.
But that desire for authenticity, for turning the volume up, as Too Late for Miss Safe put it, that seems to persist for many.
Yeah, and the decision to come out, or not, or how,
Yeah.
it's just deeply, deeply personal, with no single right answer or guaranteed outcome.
Absolutely. And maybe for you listening, if you've ever felt you had to hide parts of yourself for whatever reason,
Or faced really tough choices about expressing who you are.
these stories, these insights, hopefully offer some perspective on the complex realities many transgender people navigate.
Yeah, it leaves us with something to think about, doesn't it? Here's maybe a final thought for you to mull over. In a world that often pushes us towards simple labels, neat categories, what does it actually mean to live authentically? And what are the hidden costs, the unseen burdens of keeping up a facade no matter why we feel we have to?